Having won the Second World War, occupying both Russia and the Western syndicalist states, we thought that we would finally be able to take a rest and demobilize our society. But only 1 month after the victory, the next war began. The Entente, provoked by our military occupation of France and Great Britain, decided to go all in and declared war just after we had demobilized 1 million of our men. Fortunately, our tank divisions, 84 infantry divisions and our air force are all ready to fight. But sadly, this isn't enough to send aid to Middle Africa despite them really needing it, being surrounded on all sides. So we will need to devise a plan to win this war before too much damage is done to our colonial empire around the world. All the while keeping combat casualties as low as possible to keep our population back home from getting too upset. Nonetheless, everything starts in Spain, our biggest front with the Entente. Now, despite syndicalists destroying railways everywhere in France, our divisions heading for the front arrived to the area before Carlists had captured too much territory, and were even able to retake Bayonne. For some reason, there weren't many Spanish divisions on the front, probably since the war came as a surprise for them as well. So our high command decided to go all in, as an early victory right now would make everything easier back home. It was Guderian which took command, as Manstein is on a secret mission, and just as usual our tanks were the main attackers. The first step was to reach Ebro River, which runs north of Zaragoza. After only 3 days it had been crossed, with Zaragoza being captured as well. So the next step is to continue south and try to stop the Spaniards from establishing a defensive line. Only a day later, Barcelona was encircled and captured, the first major city to fall in this war. Using the speed of our tanks to our advantage, we encircled several of their divisions who tried to reinforce. At one point after capturing Valencia, we turned west towards their capital, and in only 5 days we had reached it. This means Spain is more than halfway to capitulation, but it doesn't mean we will stop now. All we needed was just a quick rest to restore our supplies, then we continued once again, focusing on the south, with the ultimate goal to reach all the way to Gibraltar in order to isolate the French exiles, as our Moroccan allies have already been able to capture Tangiers, contesting the straits. Despite the Spanish army starting to show up, they were simply too few and we could capture the important rock as well as the last major city in the south, Seville. So in order to capitulate them, we only had to defeat the north, which we also did. Capturing Bilbao, encircling Navarre, and once our panzers entered Leon, the Carlists surrendered and the first nation in the war has been defeated. But all of Iberia hasn't been captured yet. Portugal is still fighting and we need to hurry as Middle Africa seems to start to crumble. But first, let us take a look at what has happened back home during our offensive. The most important news, for the war at least, is that Manstein has succeeded with his secret mission to train 10 new and improved panzer divisions. They are not only equipped with 3 regiments of self-propelled artillery to increase effectiveness against infantry, but all motorized regiments are fully replaced with mechanized, which increases their armor and hardness. We are a bit unsure when they will see battle for the first time, but once they do, the Entente will tremble in fear. On the political side, not much had happened, since our politicians have been forced to do everything they can to help out our military occupation, as both, especially the French, are starting to see a lot of trouble. But sadly, progress is slow and we haven't even been able to establish local police forces yet. For our foreign policy, at least that in our alliance, things are changing quickly however. In Middle Europa our reforms are progressing, with the focus being on the economy and moving towards a single market. We have already established a central bank for all our nations, and plans are currently being drawn up to create a common reserve currency for everyone to use, the Europa Mark. Our relationship with our Oststaats has also changed. While Russia is still firmly under our control, Lithuania is starting to decouple from us, Ukraine did it a long time ago, and Poland and Belarus were both granted complete independence after the end of the Second World War as a gesture of gratitude for staying loyal to us during the bloody conflict. There is one last thing before we can return back to Iberia. You might remember that our spies had uncovered a plot by the former Transamur Republic to cross the Ural Mountains and invade our Russian Oststaat. Well, while they haven't striked yet, we have been forced to deploy tons of divisions to the area. So instead of simply waiting for them to attack, which might take months or even years, we have started planning to strike first before they are ready. The plan is to attack them in about 70 days, so we still have 2 months to completely focus on the west. And there, as told several times, we attacked the Portuguese. Completely caught off guard, they had almost no garrisons in their country, which allowed us to split it in 2, then capture Lisbon, and finally with the fall of Porto, all of Iberia has been put under our control. This means mainland Europe is now secured and that most of our actions will now involve naval landing, which is why we have started training Marine Sturm divisions, something which was planned but never realized during the Second World War. Fortunately though, they aren't needed everywhere, so our Iberian forces will still be able to fight. Some will be shipped over the Gibraltar Straits to possibly defeat the Lion of Verdun, while a few others will head for Middle Africa. However, not everyone, as the situation is better than expected due to the massive flood of Reichspakt members sending over troops through the Suez Canal. Naturally, the forces heading to Morocco arrived first, and so began the Battle of Algeria with the ultimate goal to force the French to go into exile from the place they went into exile to. After the successful introduction of our marine divisions, all of Europe except the small Shetny Island has been ridden by enemies. However, the Eastern Front has opened again with the Transamur Republic finally declaring war. Unfortunately for them, we were more than ready and 4 of Manstein's tanks are even present in the area. However, before we start using them, some interesting events have unfolded at home. Our politicians have been working hard to desyndicalize our 2 military occupations, by recruiting collaborators, giving amnesty to low-level officials and even allowing local elections. Sadly, we had soon run out of actions to fight the rebels, so all we can do now is to simply wait. And while we did, the first elections in years was held. Unsurprisingly, and despite this new war, the SPD rode their popularity to victory. This allowed them to pass the constitutional amendment vote without any issues, and so we have the most glorious constitution in the whole world. No longer is our country ruled by the Kaiser, as parliamentarism is the name of the game now. The death penalty has also been abolished, together with the introduction of women's suffrage. All to the utter horror of the DVLP and the DKP, who lost out big this election. With the second mandate already having begun, the SPD will immediately begin new reforms, spanning all areas of Germany, but their most important promise is to end all our wars, including the Japanese, before the next election. So we must immediately start if we want this to be true. Despite the Japanese sending troops to aid Transamur, our allies have already made progress, capturing the first supply hub in the conflict. And once we and our tanks joined, progress doubled with speed. We quickly advanced towards their capital of Ekaterinenburg, and it was captured quite quickly. Then we turned a bit south towards Shelibinsk, another supply hub. When it too was captured, we continued further eastwards to the 2 supply hubs in and just south of Tyumen. During this offensive, the Free Russians had just as expected joined the Entente. but so far no reinforcements have been spotted. So we continued, and this time the distance between the supply hubs was far greater, spanning all the way to Omsk. But this didn't matter, as after breaking through their defenses we met minimal resistance all the way to the city, and those who did resist could all be encircled and destroyed. So once Omsk was secured, we decided to simply continue, and that we did, only stopping if we ran out of fuel and had to wait for supply trains. We carried on the journey until we reached the supply hub about 800 kilometers from Irkutsk. The reason we stopped is because we must clear out the north and south of the railway from enemy forces. Otherwise they might be able to sneak past our own forces and blow the whole thing up. While we waited for our infantry to clear it up, we moved to Africa. While the main front has halted a long time ago, the Netherlands has shown the viability of naval invasions after capturing Lagos. Using our marines we did the same thing, and it was even more effective than theirs, as all of Senegal was completely unprotected with almost no divisions in the surrounding states either. Naturally, this allowed us to expand our holdings in all directions, and once our tanks arrived it went even faster. Soon Liberia had capitulated and we had reached all the way to our allied forces. Together we forced the Nigerians to capitulate, and so all of West Africa has been captured. And we only need to clear Cameroon to access the south with our tanks. And while our generals do that, we will return to Russia. Having already inflicted almost 1 million casualties together with our allies, they once again couldn't have any defense in depth, allowing us to break through easily, then drive all the way to Irkutsk. As we reached the city, we simply continued, and not so long after we had reached all the way to Manchuria, starting the real conflict against the Japanese. Joining forces with the Mongolians, their most northern state was captured, but as resistance got tougher, we shifted back our focus to Transamur. Our first goal was to simply reach the Sea of Japan, but realizing how few divisions they had, we sent one tank division south to Vladivostok. It advanced kilometer after kilometer, mile after mile, but just as it arrived to the city, a flood of Japanese troops landed, quickly pushing us back, encircling the division and killing it. Unfortunately for Transamur, however, the Japanese deposed their government and took control over the little area they had left. So despite the loss of a tenth of our great tanks, by deposing Transamur, the Japanese have only made it so that we no longer need to go to Vladivostok, allowing us to go straight to Japan from the territory of our Chinese friends. Well, not exactly straight. Our marines first need to deal with South Africa and India. In South Africa we had been pushed back from the Transvaal province, however Cape Town is still encircled, and with the arrival of our tanks they stood no chance as we quickly drove through the desert. Captured Pretoria and Johannesburg, then continued further until entering Durban. After some weeks, only Cape Town was left resisting, and to supply our forces we had constructed ports in the north and east of the city. A bloody battle followed, but with the small expertise our marines have in mountain fighting, we could soon fully surround the city and force its forces to surrender or die. So with Africa down, India is next, and to help us we not only have better aircrafts, but even newer tanks. Unfortunately, the only front we have with India has been a meat grinder, with 1 million deaths on both sides. Thus, we will go past it with the naval invasion of Calcutta and East Bengal, and that we did. After more than 200 million deaths, we stand ready to defeat half of our enemies, the co-prosperity sphere. Our navy is double the size of theirs, so we have no problem gaining naval superiority. And our air force is also far more modern. The plan of action is quite simple. Use the Ryukyu Islands and Shanghai as the staging grounds for an invasion of northern Kyushu. Then, since Japan is such a slim nation, we only need to send over some of our tank divisions to roll all the way to Tokyo and further. After everything was planned to the last ration, we launched the invasion. Meeting no Japanese submarines or surface ships, we reached our desired destination without issues. Now, despite a few Japanese garrisons guarding the ports, our far superior marines easily pushed them out even before they had the time to blow up the ports. So, having landed, we started capturing all of Kyushu Island while we waited for our tanks. As expected, everything went perfectly and we could now cross over to their main island. 9 of our tanks were then enough to enter Hiroshima and continue towards Osaka and Kyoto. Realizing their dire situation, the Japanese would completely leave Fengtian to themselves and sign a peace treaty with the Qing, but their forces won't reach the island in some weeks. So Kobe, Osaka, Kyoto were soon captured, with several of its garrisons being encircled. While they were crushed, some of our tanks continued east, entering Nagoya, Kanazawa and lastly Tokyo. While clearing out the city, we captured Hirohito, leading to a quick and complete capitulation of the Japanese forces. And so we have defeated the co-prosperity sphere, and we will now decide on what should happen with their territories. Fortunately, it was quite simple. The Qing got all Chinese lands, including Taiwan. In Korea, we established a republic, while Thailand and the Philippines were transferred to our German East Asian colony. Finally, in Japan, a transitional government was established to demilitarize and democratize the nation. Hirohito has been allowed to stay as emperor, but just like at home, he has been stripped from all his previous powers. So now our only opponent left is Canada. And while they are far away, they aren't as far away as you think. And we have already developed a plan to utilize this. It is to use Kamchatka as a base to naval invade Vancouver and Guyana to creep up the Caribbean, then reach Bermuda to finally naval invade Halifax. However, we can't take too long as war support is only 13%. Fortunately, however, the SPD with their 65% support have managed to fully stabilize our nation through the creation of a fully fledged welfare state and several reforms on the governance of our country and states. Prussia, for example, has been largely decentralized, which has allowed areas like Hanover and the Rhineland to gain far greater self-governance. And regarding Mitteleuropa, all our goals have been passed, allowing all our members' economies to grow. And things are also looking great in England and France, where syndicalist resistance has started to phase out. England has been the most successful so far, with collaboration exceeding resistance in all states. But unfortunately, this isn't the case for the French, who are far more resistant in nature. Still, things are going great back home, so we won't have to hurry as much. However, we still want this war to be over quickly. So immediately after our forces had reached Kamchatka, we launched our naval invasion. A few days later, we arrived to the shores of British Columbia, and despite some Canadian garrisons trying to defend the city, it was swiftly captured by our highly trained marines. We would advance a bit eastwards to the Rocky Mountain before too many Canadian forces would arrive in order to entrench ourselves there. Then we switched our focus to the Caribbean. Our allies had already taken over the southeastern islands, so we could go straight for Bahamas. And lastly, the small island of Bermuda. Then, just as planned, we naval invaded Halifax. While we sadly didn't land in the city, we did capture a port in New Brunswick, which is more than enough to bring in our tanks. As they arrived, we would try to capture the city by land, but with not enough supply, we were easily stopped in its outskirts. The same once we tried to enter Quebec. So in order to get enough supply, we started building ports. After about a month, they were constructed and we could amass 4 tank divisions to attack Halifax. Together, they were more than enough to enter the city and capture all of Nova Scotia, including its important airport, which we can use to host a little more than 100 transport planes for supply. So, with supply arriving from the air as well, we could punch through their defenses in St. Lawrence to arrive to the main Canadian area. Despite tough resistance, once we crossed the river, Quebec City, then Montreal and lastly Ottawa were all captured. After a bit of a longer drive, Toronto was also put under our panzer tracks. Now finally, to force the Entente to admit total defeat, we restarted our offensive in the west, crossed over the Rocky Mountains and entered Alberta. After that, the British exiles capitulated and the Third World War was proclaimed over, with us, Germany, the winner. The peace deal took some time, but in the end we had established new governments in Canada, India, Australia and reunified Russia. Our two colonies of German East Asia and Middle Africa were also both greatly expanded, and then there was one last thing. We created the Union of Nations, an organization that will bring an end to the constant wars in the world and act as an international forum. Of course, everyone in the Reichspakt joined. Those who seek to join the Reichspakt, like the Ottomans and the Qing, also joined. But we also had those who don't have any special relationships with us, like the Peruvian sphere and nations like Afghanistan, Tibet and Mongolia. Unfortunately, however, Brazil and the United States of America, both nations who had stayed strictly neutral in both the Second and the Third World War, didn't join. But it doesn't really matter. The Reichspakt spans every single continent and Mitteleuropa is ensuring economic and political stability for centuries to come. So much so that even the French are starting to collaborate and stop resisting, so that in maybe 2 to 5 years we will be able to restore civilian administration in the country. And who could have imagined that we would end up here, starting only as a small German statelet? Through sheer determination we could unite Germany. And despite the challenges we would face in all 3 world wars, we prevailed through them all to create an empire whose influence spans greater than any other. So thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.